So we are actually going to begin the final chapter of this book, this incredible book, and then we need to talk a little bit about what we, if people want to continue studies of Kabbalah, what direction to go. But we'll, first things first. So we are in the beginning, the final chapter of the book today, which is the 10th gate. But what I want to do is I want to first just ask, do people need a little freshener on the 9th gate? We spent 3 sessions, I think, 4 sessions on it. So I guess I want to open it up to just see if there are general questions before we start on this final chapter here.
Refreshers are good.
Right. I mean, for me too, honestly, this material is so elusive and complicated. And, I find that one way to think about the Kabbalah, not a way to think about it, I feel like reading Kabbalah is, you have to be in a different mindset for the material. Otherwise, it can be so frustrating. Let me close my door here because I don't want to annoy my co-residents. And also, of course, the material is so secretive, we don't want prying ears to listen in. So anyway, I think that if you don't have the right mindset in reading Kabbalah, then you'll just find it incredibly frustrating, because it seems like, in my experience, sometimes I'll read something and I'll have no idea what it means at all. It's just frustrating because I understand each word, but I have no idea what's being discussed. And then other times, I'll have these brief moments of like, oh, I really get it. And then other times something in between that. So, I just think you need to be patient with yourself, and also to understand that, we live in a culture in which, now reading a newspaper means that you scroll past the headlines and then you say, oh yeah, I've got it. Joe Biden does X, or, school funding, blah, blah, blah. And that's considered to be knowledge. We're talking about texts that require a huge amount of focus and concentration. And that's part of the beauty and the discipline of the Kabbalah, is just that it requires a kind of engagement with all of your faculties. And as he says in this as he says in this chapter, it requires also an understanding that there's kinds of knowledge that go beyond rationality. And he says specifically that Keter is certainly within that realm, although I would apply it to so much of the Kabbalah. So I want to encourage you to be patient with yourself and patient with the material, because sometimes we don't understand something and we say, oh, there's something wrong with me, or we don't understand something and we say, oh, there's something wrong with the text. And I want to encourage you to be compassionate with yourself and respectful of the text, and understand that repeated readings will reveal a lot of new insights. And the last thing I want to say, and then Cheryl, I saw your hand up. The last thing I want to say is that we encounter the Kabbalistic tradition in a different way than our predecessors did. Because if you were to study Kabbalah with Jikatilia, as he mentions a couple of times, there are concepts, very important concepts, that he says have to be described mouth to mouth. And what he means by that is you got to be sitting with your teacher, right? He's not going to put everything into writing. And so, you and I are not part of that Kabbalistic chain of tradition, it still exists in circles of the Jewish world, but we're encountering him entirely through his written word. And of course, you know, he wrote his words because he wanted his book to be read as widely as was reasonably possible in the 13th century. But still, there were concepts that could only be learned from the mouth of another Kabbalistic master in the presence of that Kabbalistic master. And so you also have to realize that we're not quite getting it in the ideal form of communication. And that's clear in a lot of Kabbalistic writing. There's just some stuff that either they're not going to put in writing or just can't be grappled with solely in writing. And you need a teacher there with you to engage you in perhaps getting beyond your intellect or whatever modality of teaching they're going to engage you in. Okay, Cheryl.
I find some frustration just when we talk about understanding this book in sort of like, I know what the words mean and I'm going to put them together and then I'm going to understand it. I don't think that's what this book is for. And, you know, when we started it and I got myself a copy, I started reading through it and I just, I refused to read it anymore, not because obviously I'm uninterested in the subject matter, but this is not a book that you sit down and read a chapter. Right. It's a book that you get together in a group like this.
Yeah.
And actually the process of us getting together is, and discussing it, is part of learning what's going on in the book.
Right. Good. Yeah, but you mean it just in the sense of the explanations become clearer, or you're saying just by connecting with other people, you're somehow tapping into something in the book?
Yeah. I don't know if, it's not necessarily like the words become clearer because, they're, it's more like doing this as a group practice.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Changes your state of consciousness.
Yeah.
That. And then in that state of consciousness, it makes more sense.
Yeah, I think there's something about that. Listen, I mean, whatever works for a person, and I don't want to push the book too far into the realm of inscrutability. I mean, I'm not saying it is unknowable. I'm just saying it requires a level of concentration and persistence that almost nothing else we encounter in our normal daily life requires. And that's probably true of every mystical tradition in every religion, but I'm not familiar with those. I'm just familiar with the Kabbalah, which is obviously famously obtuse and difficult to comprehend. But I hear what you're saying, and if the social dynamic and the back and forth puts you in a state of mind that's more open and more receptive to grasping some of the concepts, then all the better. Rivka and Brad, and then we're going to jump in. Hi, Rivka.
Hi, Rabbi. It's great to see you. It's been a while.
Good to see you too. Yeah. Good to see you guys. Who's there with you? I recognize David.
This is my mom. She's visiting from Florida, and I've been wanting to introduce you for a while.
Hi. I've heard a little bit about you, and I'm so delighted to meet you. And I think you probably don't know. I'm a big fan of your daughter. We did some awesome
thank you
learning.
so much. I'm so happy to meet you, Rabbi, and everyone else too.
Welcome. Glad you're here. Thanks, Rivka, for taking a moment to do that. Brad. Oh, you're muted, my friend. You're muted.
That better?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Along the lines of what you've been talking about, I find it almost the opposite. That the more I concentrate and the more I beat my head against the bricks for this, the more frustrated I get, and then I'll be perfectly relaxed with almost nothing in mind and a concept. And as for now, I have to say that I've only come to grips, I think, with really one part of this, but it's opened up so much to me and so inspiring that it gets me to, and now I can't stay away.
Right.
But I know better than to, yeah, I know better than to try too hard or to
right.
even really consider it an intellectual exercise almost.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I would just thank you for that. That's a beautiful comment, and I completely get it. It does have an addictive quality. I think that, yeah, I mean, and look, I think everyone has their own approach and their own way of explaining what it is to learn these texts. I would just say for me, first of all, I definitely relate to what you're saying. Like I have times when I'm really just trying to bang my head against it. And then, I'm in that mindset of like, I've got to learn A, B, C, and have to learn this before that. And then I'll come back to it, a month later, and suddenly this paragraph that it was impenetrable will open itself to me. But the other thing is, in my experience, and again, this is my experience, not necessarily the same for everybody. I'm not prescribing anything. There is the kind of rational level, like he's introducing certain names, and those names have a particular place, right? That the name Ehyeh is associated with Keter, and it's not associated with Malchut. So there is a precise discourse, and there are rules, and there's a kind of rational approach that he has, and that requires a way of thinking. So I sort of have to have that in line, and then there's a way in which I have to sort of, I don't know, get beyond that or enter into a different way of knowing in order to really make sense of these concepts. But in any event, okay, we are going to jump in, and since there's a couple folks who are just joining us for the first time, I just want to say very briefly that this is the Kabbalah of Yosef Chikatilia, 13th century. So this precedes the Kabbalah that is more well known, the Kabbalah of the Ari. So for example, you're not going to hear Chikatilia talking about the shattering of the vessels and some of the magnificent concepts of the Ari that don't come into the Kabbalah until a little bit later, Shvirati Kelim, etc. So this is a pre-Ari Kabbalah. 13th century, it's much more akin to the Zohar. This probably informed the Zohar. It's actually possible that Chikatilia was one of the circle of the Zohar, one of the small group of people that was described in the circle of the Zohar or alluded to in the circle of the Zohar. So we're in deep medieval territory here and remember that he has two tasks here. I'm saying this, he doesn't say this. One is generally to introduce you to the world of Kabbalah. Actually, he doesn't think he's introducing you to the world of Kabbalah. He's assuming that the people who are literate enough to pick up his book and to understand it have already poked around in the Kabbalah. But he's giving you engaging you in the Kabbalah, but also more specifically, the second thing that he's doing is he's giving you tools to read the Torah and to understand the Torah, the Tanakh, in a different way, because essentially the entire work is a book of divine names, and he's telling you the meaning of those different names in very specific ways. Okay, so let me share my screen with you. And once again, I've largely drawn on the translations from this book that I handed out. It's backward in my camera as I look at it. I don't know if it's backwards to you. I never understand that. Gates of Light. Larger? What's that?
Can you make it larger, please?
Well, yeah, you actually own this book, Sarah. This is the book that you. Oh, you want me to make the text bigger? Yes, I will in a second. But right now I'm just showing people the translation I'm using. The translations I'm using are mostly from that book. I've modified them in some ways, in some cases. But let us just jump in. So in this case, I have not included, in each chapter he introduces a verse that kind of stands in for him for that midah, that attribute, that name. In this case, I did not include it, not because I'm hiding it from you, but because he does not choose a verse that has Ehyeh in it. He uses a different verse, and maybe we can go into that later, but in any event. Okie dokie. who will read this? Cheryl, will you start us off by reading this first paragraph?
Okay. The 10th name of the holy names is Ehyeh. This name ascends to the top of Keter, which is known by no other. This name is concealed in the hidden tent and is appointed to the world of Rachamim.
Rachamim, which means mercy or compassion.
Huh.
Okay.
It is absolute mercy without any mixture of judgment.
Okay, so so remember that we've been ascending from the bottom of the Sfirot, right? His first chapter is the realm of Malchut, and then he moves up from Malchut, Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tiferet, etc. And the realm of the created world that we know is a world within which judgment exists, in which there's consequences for our actions. We think of in terms of good and bad. We think of in terms of whether we've done the right thing or not done the right thing. Delineation and boundaries. Now, in the created world, when it's in harmony, in our world when it's in harmony, then yes, there's judgment in the world, but it's judgment that is mixed together with Rachamim, so that the world can stand in harmony. But the name we're talking about now, which is at the very tippy top of the ladder here, is just pure mercy, just pure compassion, pure Rachamim. There is zero admixture of judgment. So imagine, I mean, this is an analogy that probably does more obfuscation than clarification, but imagine standing in the presence of somebody who had just zero judgment about you, and you come to them and you're aware of all of your deficits and all of the mistakes you've made and shortcomings and actions you've done you shouldn't have and things you didn't do that you should have. And this person's love for you is just palpable and flowing out. They're zero interest in any of your shortcomings because they don't see any shortcomings. They just see goodness, and they just bestow goodness and blessing upon you. Imagine standing in the presence of such a being. That is what it is to stand in the presence of Ehyeh. It has zero judgment. So then let me ask you this question. If that's the case, then why doesn't the world exist in Ehyeh? Why is Ehyeh, the realm of Keter, so far removed from creation, as he'll tell us repeatedly? If it's so good, like, great, let's just do that instead of the world we live in. Why don't we live in that realm without judgment, without Deen? Why can't we have that? Ann Paul?
Well, I'm not sure what would happen if we were in that world, but I know that so many of our prayers are being grateful for discernment, for being able to tell the difference between day and night, being able to tell the difference between holy and profane. So it's something that we value very highly because we pray about it all the time.
Right.
And if we lived in that realm, we wouldn't have those things. We wouldn't be able to discern between things.
Okay, great. Very nice. Sarah, did you have your hand up?
Well, I could have. I didn't, but I have a question. Is it not so attainable that we search for it, but if we're praying for discernment and wisdom, and we're still praying for it, probably will tomorrow and the day after, we're not attaining something.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that. Yeah, I would say yes to that. But there's a very specific reason it's not attainable. The problem of its attainability is not that we're like, we don't have, we can't quite purify ourselves enough to reach that high or whatever. It's that, remember that Deen is not just judgment. Deen is delineation and boundaries. And if in a world without boundaries, there's just unity. There wouldn't be a you and there wouldn't be a me, right? There wouldn't be good, there wouldn't be bad, there wouldn't be up, there wouldn't be down. There wouldn't be Josh versus and Sarah or Brad or anything. There would just be boom. So as soon as we talk about the world as we know it, the created world as we know it, where I can like look out and navigate and I see that there's a tree there and there's a person walking down the street and I'm delineating, it's a world where I can exist, and where my sentence can be broken up into, subject, verb, object, etc. That's the world we exist in. That has Deen in it, because Deen is the power, the capacity of discernment. If we arise above that world, on the one hand, that's desirable because we're moving towards unity, but we would not exist in that world, right? Because that's just a world of near perfect unity. And so that is why we don't exist in that world. As long as we are to exist, it means that the world of delineation is going to exist. Okay? Does that make some sense? Yeah? If you don't get it, raise your hand.
It does, but it makes me wonder, I didn't say it wasn't attainable, just not yet attainable. I like to think that we're working towards something.
Well, right. That's the idea, right? Is that the work now, and now I'm borrowing a little bit of the language of the Ari, the work of Tikkun Ha'olam, of repairing the world, is just that. It's getting past the delineation and acting to realize and to manifest the unity that's underneath it. So that when I can give to others of myself, whether it's of my stuff or of my patience, my whatever, my skills or gifts, when I can give those to others without any sense that I'm, I need to think of myself and keep something for me. And when everybody does that and we're all acting as one, then we're kind of lifting the world above the realm of judgment and Deen. But that's time of the Mashiach kind of stuff. We're not there yet. We're supposed to be working towards it, right?
You said that we could not exist as we at that level.
Correct.
Who said so?
I love
or is
that.
It just the sense that
I love the chutzpah of that question. Who said so?
Who said so? Well, right. I want to know, after what kind of deliberations is it basically saying that if you need to be a we,
right,
you are not unified. You are not elevating yourself. You're not being enlightened because you need to be a we. You were talking about boundaries, and I kind of dropped a stitch there.
Yeah. I love that question. Who said so?
Can we answer in a different way to that?
Please.
Maybe because of our abilities as Bnei Adam, because Teva Ha'adam Ra Min Yorav, which means we were not perfect. And when the Mashiach comes, maybe human being going to be perfect, but we all have all those ability to do wrong. And you have this all the time, the fight off between the good and the ability of those two things in a human being. So we were not supposed to be perfect, right? From the beginning, when we were created by God.
Yeah, thank you. Right, I'm glad you said that, Oshra, because I think that, the fact that we're not in the realm of Keter, and I guess this is why I was saying, why do we not live in Keter? It's not a criticism of us. It's not like some horrible failing. Like we were, my point was rather that we are created in a world that has Deen within it. It's not that we're terrible people and therefore we're being punished, or something like that. It's that we're born into a world and we exist within the realm of Deen, where Deen exists. And so in any event, I'm just trying to draw out the point that Ehyeh rises above this. The sphere of Keter rises above that realm of delineation, before Dean enters into the picture. Well, I say before, and that's a confusing way to talk about it, but I'm for a moment looking at the Sfirot as in a kind of serial manner. But the realm of Keter is the realm that has no judgment, and it's just pure mercy. Now that tells you something else. And Brad, I see your question. It tells you something else. Let me get back to the text, so I realize I have the advantage of having this in front of me and you don't. So so if we do for a moment, if we do for a moment look at the Sfirot in the way that I briefly just described them as being an unfolding from one phase to the other. That is, first you start with Keter, then you get to Chokhmah, and then you get to Bina, which is the way of talking about the Sfirot in terms of the creation of the world. If you look at the Sfirot like that, and that's not the only way to look at them, and if I remember to come back to that idea, I will, but it means that the initial impulse towards creation that God had, or God has, I should say, is one of pure rachamim, of like pure beauty and no judgment. Like that is the primal divine impulse in engagement with the world. And I'm belaboring this a little bit because I was just talking to somebody earlier this week, maybe it was in our Torah study class last week, I don't remember, but we were talking about the reputation that the Torah has for those who misunderstand it, for being a religion of judgment, like a God who's severe and judgmental, versus Christianity, which is this tradition of love, right? That bifurcation, or that is such a deep misunderstanding that's almost like built into Western culture. So this Kabbalistic concept is such a beautiful example of the ways in which our tradition does not view it that way at all, that God's fundamental essence is one of love and compassion. That is the primary impulse that guides God towards creating the world. And then as it unfolds out of necessity and kind of beyond our comprehension, there are different elements mixed in. But the first ingredient of the world, as we might say, is compassion and love coming into the world. Okay, Brad, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, well, funny thing, my question was just, as you said, why isn't God this way? Because God judges us. God is judgmental. And so you just went there. You just kind of answered
right.
that to some extent.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So but first of all, we have to be careful with our language here, because when you say, why isn't God like that? God is like that, but it's a question of which dimension of God are we talking about, right?
I see.
Because the God of Keter is God, but so is the God of Din, the God of judgment. And so what we're trying to do in this book is what he's trying to do in this book is he's trying to clarify how the tradition talks about different aspects of the divine unity. But still, your question is still a really good one. So then the question so then we could maybe riff on your question and say, if God's primary impulse, so to speak, was to create the world through rachamim, through compassion and without judgment, right? Which is just speaks to like a God of love and goodness, wanting to bestow goodness on creation. Then why is that not the way we encounter God in the world? Why do we live in a world in which there seems to be so much harshness and pain and difficulty and suffering and division? I'm not even going to pretend to try to give a simple answer to that, but once God decided that God wanted a partner in creation, and I'm putting air quotes around everything, once God decided that God wanted a partner in creation, God had to create a realm other than God's self. God had to create a realm of Din and delineation, so there could be a you, and there could be a me, and there could be God, and there could be a world. And that's the world that we live in. And so it was out of necessity that God created this world. Once having created the world, the question was, how does God maintain goodness and blessing within a created world of multiplicity? And that is what the Kabbalah then attempts to explain with all of the 10 sefirot. They're a way of trying to talk about how do we look at a world of multiplicity and see within it the underlying unity of all things. I feel like you asked a very sharp, clear question, and then I went off in a wildly divergent tangent, but I hope that I answered your question in some way.
Yeah, oh, you did. But then I have another question, is that when you, as you approach Torah and as you go through it from the beginning, you get the impression that God is surprised at how wicked man is.
Right.
In other words, he perceives from the beginning that man will be much more perfected and much better than in fact what he turns out, and he ends up having to destroy man
right.
several times. So.
Right. Well, so there, I'll just say, because that's a beautiful question and it's a huge topic, and I'll just say about that you have to be careful. We have to be careful when we're reading the Torah. Are we reading it? We have to make a decision about what lens we're going to use to read the Torah. So if you remember Pardes, have you heard the concept of Pardes? Pardes is traditionally the four classic modalities of Torah reading and interpretation. There's the Peshat level, and the Peshat level means kind of the literally on the narrative level what is happening. There's a person named Adam, there's a person named Eve, there's a character named God who makes decisions, and that the Peshat is just about trying to really nail down what is happening in this narrative. That is not the way the Kabbalists read the Torah. The Kabbalists are in the fourth mode in the Pardes acronym, which is Sod, which means the inner secret meaning. And there, the sentence "God regretted" doesn't even have any meaning. It doesn't mean that sentence has no sense in the secret inner meaning of the Kabbalah. So we have to be careful that. And by the way, to be really clear, I love the Peshat reading of the Torah. There's a lot to be said for it, but we have to make sure we're not mixing apples and oranges. If we're going to talk about the Kabbalah, then we can't use a Peshat modality to set up the questions we're going to try to answer, because in the Kabbalah, God has no regrets.
I see. And my reading of it, the way I read it, is changing along those very lines as the more I learn. The more I learn, the more I make decisions, and it becomes apparent to me what is where do we fall within those four.
Sure. And to be clear, I'm not as I made clear already, I'm not really disparaging it. I mean, most of the teaching I do is in the Peshat level. At least my weekly Torah study class is mostly about Peshat. But I'm just trying to clarify how to think about your question in light of the Kabbalah. Okay, I'm going to move on if that's okay. I see we have Michael Sassno with us now. Hi, Michael. Hold on.
Hello, Rabbi.
Chatted a question. Oh, okay. Someone had to split. That's cool. All right. Okay, so will somebody, Michael Sassno, I'm looking at you. Will you unmute and read this highlighted paragraph?
Are you looking at me? It doesn't look like you're looking at me.
I am.
Okay.
Well, no, sorry. I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at a digitally reproduced image of you.
Yes. It's like you have to stare right into your camera to make it look like you're looking right at everyone. Oh, that's great.
He knows what we're thinking at all times.
Okay, let's read that paragraph.
Sleeping, he knows when we're awake. We have already explained in the first gate how the name Yud He Vav He stands in the middle of the two names.
Ehiyah Adonai.
Oh, Ehiyah Adonai. And the name Adonai is the store from which one receives the bounty that comes from both of them.
All right, so let's decode this a little bit. So I wish that I had my let me just see if I can really quickly pull up a tree of life, just so I can show you, remind you what he's talking about. 1 second, sorry here. Doing a quick Google search. The interweb is quite amazing, isn't it? Okay, here we go. Okay, so here, I just happen to be looking at the Wikipedia thing on the Tree of Life. Okay, so his language again. We have explained in the first how the name Adonai, or sorry, excuse me, that was confusing. How the name Yud-He-Vav-He. Okay, now remember that Yud-He-Vav-He is here, it's written as Tiferet, but it's this middle one that I'm circling around, right? That's Yud-He-Vav-He. Stands in the middle of the two names Ehyeh Adonai. Here's Ehyeh, which is here written as Keter, but Ehyeh is up there. And where's Adonai? Everyone's muted. Several of you are answering.
Malchut.
Yeah, Malchut is Adonai. Okay, Adonai is one of the many, many names of Malchut. So now the reason that I selected this paragraph from this chapter is because remember that one of the things that's so difficult about the Kabbalah is that the Sefirot are talked about in different combinations, depending on what it is that the author is what point the author is trying to make. So usually we talk about the Sefirot in triads. So Keter, Chochma, Bina, we spent some time talking about that triad in the last class. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, these three are very commonly talked about. But here he's talking about a different combination that also happens to be a triad, and that is Keter, Tiferet, and Adonai. Excuse me, I was mixing apples and oranges there. Ehyeh, Yud-He-Vav-He, and Adonai. Okay, so let's go back and look at that again. We've already explained in the first gate that he just means in his first chapter how the name Yud-He-Vav-He stands in the middle of the two names Ehyeh Adonai. And the name Adonai is the store from which one receives the bounty that comes from both of them. So we receive through Malchut, right? That's the primary, there's no other way to access anything for created beings. Everything is going to come to us through Malchut as long as things are in alignment and things are flowing and we're not totally in the world of separation, we are going to receive everything through Malchut. Both Keter and Tiferet flow into Malchut. So what does that really mean? Or how I should say, how can we maybe a little more practically make sense of that? So we're here in the realm of Malchut. In the realm of Malchut, everything you see around you, everything you're hearing, I see behind Cheryl the beautiful trees and the garden she's sitting in, the air, the trees, the sounds, the sights, the smells, the thoughts, absolutely everything is a product in some way of the source of creation, allowing everything to flow into the realm that we have access to. And that contains, so to speak, both the ceaselessly flowing river of mercy and compassion without any judgment, that is Keter, but also in our world, it's also the Yud-He-Vav-He, the realm that contains all of the different judgments and but balanced with compassion, and the created existence is drawing on both of those. Okay, that's what that paragraph is saying. Let me pause there because there ought to be questions. I don't mean that as a judgment of you. I'm just saying, I'm assuming what I just said was at least partially baffling. Okay, should I move on? Speak now or for now, hold your peace. Not forever. Okay. All right, so alrighty, so I think I'm going to come back. I might come back to this, but so now I'm going to come down here. So these are all in order that the chapter is written, but they're not contiguous. I've taken bits and pieces from the chapter. I'm going to skip over this very rich passage, which talks about the 13 attributes of mercy, and I'm going to go here. Myra Siegel, will you read that?
I'm on a cell phone and it cuts in and out. So
oh my gosh,
better if I don't read.
You poor thing. That's a tiny screen to be trying to do this on. Okay.
Otherwise, I would gladly read.
It's all good. All right, Ann Prawl, you're up. Oh, did she? Oh, is she the one who left? Okay, then I'm having no. Okay, you're right. I'm having Brad Schertz. You're up.
Okay. Thus say to the children of Israel,
okay,
sent to me to you, Exodus 3:14. This means that the realm of absolute mercy was revealed to all the Sephirot, and the name appeared and transformed the attribute of judgment into mercy. That is the reason you are being redeemed. You are not worthy to be redeemed because of your wicked deeds. Rather, the time has come and face of mercy has been revealed, and it is in the name of mercy, which is the name of Ehyeh, that you are being redeemed.
Okie dokie. So let me just ask you, if you're baffled, that's okay. And that's all right. It won't be all right if you're still baffled in 10 minutes, but it's okay if on your initial reading of that, you're just confused. What does this say about the Exodus? If you can put this together, what does this say about why the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt?
This is saying that this was done because of mercy.
Complete mercy, right? It was not, and this is actually somebody who's into comparative religions and how Judaism responded in the Middle Ages to Christian discourse would have a field day with this, and I'm not going there, but it talks about what this is saying is that at the time of the Exodus, if you had taken all of the merits of the Israelites and their mistakes or their sins, and you would put them on a balance, they wouldn't have deserved redemption. Okay, but that's not really the way to look at or understand the Exodus. What happened was that the Israelites were in Egypt, and Ehyeh, this force of just overwhelming mercy, was not interested in whether anyone deserved redemption. It just swept in to change the world. And it embraced them and it brought them out. And that's the force of Ehyeh. Ehyeh is not interested in counting up whether you're ready, whether you've prepared, whether you really separated yourself from the influences of Egypt. And by the way, that's the rabbinic discourse that's behind this, is to remember that when the Israelites were in Egypt, they weren't merely if you look at on the Peshat level, what you have is a people that went down to Egypt and they become influenced by Egypt, and then they become enslaved. If you look at it through a Kabbalistic lens, what you have is that people go down to Mitzrayim. In Mitzrayim, they become separated from the source of life. They become separated from God, and they become kind of lost there. And they don't know how to find their way back. They don't know how to enact unity. They don't know how to unify the world. They don't know how to reach out to God and to look for something that's beyond them and beyond their experience. And nonetheless, Ehyeh acts and fills the world with mercy and takes out this people and kind of injects this higher consciousness into them so that they can enact their redemption and come closer to God. So if we apply that to Egypt then and the Torah, then that is what it is. If we apply it to our own lives, and to the world that we live in, this passage should be a source of immense, an affirmation of incredible hopefulness about the world, that there is a way of Jewish thinking, which is kind of, I would say, more normative and core to who we are and that we can't let go of, which is that we have to merit the repair of the world. We have to merit the unity. Through our own work, and introducing acts of goodness into the world, teaching about the fundamental unity of all creation, doing the specific hard work that it takes to kind of empty ourselves of ego and to reach out to one another and to heal the world. And our ability to do that is going to be based on our capacity and how hard we work, right? We'll be, so to speak, judged based on our ability to do that. And if we are, if we merit it, we will heal the world and draw close to one another. But that's fundamental, and that's core to the Jewish tradition. But there is a recognition that there are moments in which something is accomplished that is beyond our abilities and is without regard to our abilities, and an immense healing of the world can come even when we don't merit it. And it maybe surpasses our understanding. And this is how he's reading the fact that when God talks to Moses in Exodus 3:14, and let's just go there for a minute. Are you seeing the text in front of you, the Hebrew text? So this is when Moses first encounters God at the burning bush. This is the discussion at the burning bush. And Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt?" Vayomer ki ehyeh imach. And he said, Ehyeh is with you. So they translated, in English, they translate it very reasonably and accurately as "I will be with you." But Jikatilia wants us to not focus on the English, which he didn't know. And he's saying, no, Ehyeh is with you. He's saying, Moses, in spite of the incredible obstacles and challenges that you are going to face, in spite of the fact that you're facing a people that is not conditioned to have any hope or to believe in anything beyond the power of Egypt or to believe in anything beyond their own weakness, don't worry, because Ehyeh is with you. There's something that will go beyond all the reasons you can give why you shouldn't have hope, all the reasons you can give about the Israelites are not ready for it. They don't know how to free themselves. They don't know how to see past Egypt. They don't know how to instill any hope. Forget all of that. Ehyeh is with you, and it's going to allow this moment to unfold. So that's why I love that passage. Questions, comments? Michael.
Yes, sir. So where is it in that area of the Torah where God says, "I've brought you out of Egypt so that I can be a God to you, for you"?
Well, first of all, tell me what's behind your question.
I'm just thinking that that's at the core of everything. And it just never struck me in a moment the way it just did. It's like you can talk about why, if we didn't deserve it, why did we get liberated? Why did we get taken out? And that's the reason.
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful.
I've brought you out of Israel so that I can be a God to you. And then it's almost like the whole core of Judaism is, what does it mean for God to be a God to us? What does that mean on God's side? What does that mean on our side? What's the whole thing about? Because that's the core of why we were brought out of Egypt, so
Beautiful.
That God could be a God to us.
Beautiful. And I love that. And, it's funny, Michael, because before you joined us, we were just talking about how we relate to this text, and that sometimes things leap out of the text at moments when you're not expecting it, right? The verse we just read in itself doesn't point to what you just said, but you had this realization that went kind of beyond the verse. But I just want to say that you can, and Osher, I see your hand up in 1 second, I'll get you. I want to say that you can extend what you just said to well beyond the Jewish story and to the question of why did God create the world, right? It's the same question. God created the world because God wanted to be a God that would have a relationship to a world that he could then unify with. So Yasher Koach. Osher, go ahead.
Can you please bring the verse again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right here, 12.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's like 3 different ways of presenting God, because there's Ehyeh, and there's Anochi, and there's Ha-Elohim. Are those like 3 different ways that he present God, or what does the Kabbalah says about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I'll say, I guess the best way to say it is to say over the course of our discussion of this chapter, we're going to touch on some of that, but we also have touched on some of that. So for example, so we've talked about the fact that Elohim is the name associated with Gevura, which is Din, or associated with judgment. That's the God that created the force of creation, that created delineation and separated light from darkness and water from land and you from me. That's Elohim. So that's one of the voices that's being recognized in this sentence. So for those who, there's Elohim. And then, whoopsie, sorry. Anochi is a little more confusing because it's used in multiple ways, but we're going to see that the word I, as in ani, is associated with malchut. And so yes, every different name that God refers to as God's self with, it has a different significance in the Kabbalah. So for now, I'll just say it like that. And then if we get to it, we might not get to it today. In fact, I'm certain we won't, because I see it's now 1 p.m. But in the next discussion about this chapter, as we continue, he's going to talk specifically about another aspect of your question. He's going to ask the question, why is God sometimes hu, and sometimes ata, and sometimes ani? And through those 3 names that are used, and for those who don't know Hebrew, why is it that sometimes God is he, sometimes God is you, and sometimes God is I? And he's gonna bring us through that. But great question. Okay. Another thing I want to talk about, and this runs the risk of being sort of so well, whatever. I'll just say it rather than rap about it. So what I want to point out. So remember that he says here, and I have said that the word ehyeh. Excuse me. Let me start over. The sphera of Keter is beyond us in some way, right? It's so elusive and so hidden that we don't fully have access to it. And versus the realm of Malchut, we're not always in Malchut consciousness. A lot of the time we're so stuck in the world of ego that we don't see any Malchut. We don't see any overarching framework or meaning that would point to God. But we can achieve Malchut. It's not beyond us. Accessing the realm of Keter, where we just perceive, like really experience that the world is fully just only mercy, we don't really have access to that. We can talk about it, but according to the Kabbalah, we don't really have access to that sustained level of consciousness where all we see is God's mercy all the time. It's hidden from us compared to Malchut. And there's something in the name itself that kind of points to that, that I want to point to. So remember that when you look at this word Ehyeh, I'll make it bigger. Bonk. Remember that the vowels here are only the vowels that are applied by a later tradition. If you're looking at a Sefer Torah, which God willing soon in a time near to us we'll be able to read from again, rather than just reading from a Chumash in this time of COVID. But remember that there are no vowels in the Torah, right? It just has the letters. So what sound, and Osher, you're not allowed to answer this because you speak Hebrew. So you can come in to rescue if we get stuck. What sound does the letter Aleph make?
It's silent.
Yeah. The Aleph makes this sound, right? The Aleph is like ready to make a sound, but only when it's put in the context of a word next to another letter, when there's a vowel put into it. But Aleph is without sound. It's just like a gesture of preparedness to speak. And in that sense, and now I'm getting a little symbolic here, it's appropriate that Keter, the realm that is most elusive and most hidden from us, is that its name, its true name, begins with the letter that not only initiates the whole Aleph Bet, right, which is in itself already an important, symbolically speaking, because Keter initiates creation. So Aleph initiates the Aleph Bet, but also it's a letter that doesn't make sound. Like the letter Bet makes a sound. If I asked you what sound does Bet make without a vowel, you would say B, right? Or if I asked you even Yud, which also is a very supernal heavenly letter, you would say it says Yud, or Taf is T, right? But the letter Aleph is just, and so it's beyond us. It doesn't contain any meaning that we can immediately hear. And it's elusive because it's both elusive with an A and elusive with an E, because it suggests a meaning, but it doesn't actually contain anything that we can comprehend. And so I'm just offering that as something to think about when you see the name Ehyeh, is that it already, with its first letter, it already tells you something about the Sephira that it represents in terms of its indiscernibility and unknowability. Okay, maybe, let me just take a look and see if there's a bite-sized chunk that we can go for, or whether it would just take us into another, well, I'll tell you what, let's skip over, we're gonna skip over some other stuff that maybe we'll come back to next time, and let's just read this. Okie dokie. Sarah Sturts, will you read this?
This Sephira is called and alluded to in many parts of the Torah as he, who. Let me explain. Know that since the Sephira Keter is hidden, there is no one who can contemplate anything without listening through the ear, and not merely knowing because of his intense hiddenness. He is called he who in the Torah, like we call one who does not stand in one's presence.
A little bit of an awkward translation, but what this phrase means is, you know, if I'm Sarah, if I'm talking to you, I'm not going to call you she, right? I'm going to call you you. Or if I'm talking to Michael, I'm not going to call him he. I'm going to call him you or Michael. So it's just saying that one of the names, which is he, which in Hebrew is pronounced who, that's the name you use when you're referring to someone who's not there. You're referring to someone in the third person.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying therefore, we refer to Keter as who or he, because it's as though Keter is not right in our presence. We're referring to Keter as in the third person, as though Keter is remote from us, because Keter is remote from us. This reminds me of this thing my father used to say when I was a kid that was so baffling. He is who is he, she, he is she, and dog is fish. That was my dad's little baffling Hebrew. No wonder it was so hard for me to learn Hebrew when I finally got to it. So anyway, so the word he in English, the English word he, meaning a male who's the third person, in Hebrew, you pronounce that as who, okay? So now he gives verses elsewhere that I have not included here that he wants us to read in light of that, and we'll get to some of those next time. But what I'm trying to convey to you, and we'll close on this, what I'm trying to convey to you is this concept that's kind of fundamental in understanding Keter, well, in talking about Keter, which is that it's hidden and remote from us. And so rather than contemplate like a thing that's hidden, a way to think about that is something I said earlier, which is the experience of just pure mercy and pure compassion coming at us all the time as being the essence of all things. That is hidden. It's there because, as he said, that's how the world came to be. But from our limited perception, we don't really see that. Maybe once in a while we taste it through some, on a lower level, we have a brief flash of like the fundamental goodness of all things, but we don't really perceive. Like if we could put on our spiritual glasses so that we could only see this like divine forces coming at us, even with those glasses, we would not really be able to see pure Keter coming at us all the time in the world that we live in. But it is there. It's very, very concealed. If it were not there, the world wouldn't stand. The world could not exist without that fundamental good divine kindness and mercy flowing into the world at all times. It is the fundamental cornerstone of all creation, but it's deeply concealed from us, and we perceive God, we perceive the world through all of the other dimensions of God that are much closer to us: division and multiplicity, and sometimes suffering, but also blessing and goodness. Keter is fundamental, but deeply, deeply hidden, and we won't perceive it in its pure form, no matter how high we get. Brad.
Yeah, just tell me that at some point we're going to go into what the phrase means, what it means to be God-fearing. What aspect is that?
Oh.
What does that refer to?
Well, I skipped yeah, we will, but you got to remind me, because there's this beautiful passage, which I think is from the Psalms, although I see I didn't cite it. He talks about that. And I think in the chapter on Dean, which we talked about months and months and months ago, I think before you joined the class, Brad, he did talk about that as well. So just remind me next time, and we'll maybe start there. Okay?
Oh, I will. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you to those who contemplated and dug deep. Thank you to those who offered insights and reflections based on their own knowledge. And it was a pleasure to learn with you. And we will continue next time with this chapter. Take care.
Bye.